So today is a very special event because we have two speakers. Farha Hanif is a young Bangladeshi-American who is part of our committee, and she just came back from Bangladesh. Took a long trip there for months, I think, 2-3 months. So she's got some interesting information about what's going on in Bangladesh and what it's like to be a Bangladeshi-American woman in America, especially with all the pressures of the rise of Islamophobia and things like that we have to deal with. So the only way to deal with it is to inform each other about it and show that everybody has a lot of things in common, and that if we learn and walk in each other's shoes, we get rid of this Islamophobic attitude. The other speaker we have is very prominent young woman in the community now. I have yet to meet her till today, so I'm very excited to hear from her credentials. It sounds like it's going to be great information. She's started a task force, a group called the Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative, and her name is Namirah Islam. So they're both going to speak, and we're looking very much forward to both of them. So let's start out first with our first speaker, and her name is Farha Hanif. Here's Farha. Let's welcome her. Give her a nice welcome.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So I am going to speak, obviously, about Bangladeshi identity, but I want to, well, let me start off with my slideshow. My assistant here. So basically what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, introduce me, who I am, why you should even think about wasting your time listening to me. Hopefully it's not going to be a waste of time. Also, I'm going to talk about the research that was very centered on Islamophobia that I did when before graduating from Oakland University. And then I'm going to just hit on briefly about the differences I observed in the Bangladeshi community in the UK and in the US, because I spent last summer interning there. And then I'm just going to talk about a few obstacles that we may experience as Bangladeshi-Americans. Go ahead. Okay, so just about me. So I'm sure you guys were dying to see a little picture of us. So this is me and my sister. This is in 1997 in Bangladesh. Just thought visuals, you know. Next. So basically about me. I was born in Bangladesh. I came here when I was 2 years old with my family. And one of the reasons I would say that we did move around when I was younger a lot, but I'd say I was primarily raised in Michigan. And the reason that my parents actually moved to Michigan was Hamtramck, because when they did visit Michigan and they visited Hamtramck, just the community that they saw here, my dad would talk out, if you knew him, he would talk hours and hours about how Hamtramck is like the greatest city in the world because it's just this cultural hub that has so much diversity. And yeah, there may be internal conflicts and, you know, I mean, racism thing, it exists all over the world, but it was one place where people were for somewhat coexisting peacefully and beautifully. And so my parents, you know, that was the reason that we moved here, and that's why we always have this connection to Hamtramck, and that actually helped us stay in touch with our heritage and celebrate our culture a lot more than may have been possible if we lived in a suburb of Wisconsin where we did originally live. And you know, back to why I feel so passionate about my culture and my heritage and my country is all because of my parents. I mean, my whole life, you know, it's like, okay, learn how to speak English. You need English to survive in this country, learn. But don't you dare speak English at home. Like, you need to speak Bengali, you need to know the language. You know, my whole life telling me stories about the history of the country, how it became a country. So everything that I grew up with was as much 50% America as it was 50% Bangladesh. So that's where kind of I'm coming from. Just to go forward, my dad, he, one of the reasons that I feel so connected with this community in particular is because of my dad. He worked, like I said before, he loved this city and would sing praises of it, but he worked for the U.S. Census in 2010, and his whole idea was, like, if you walk outside, you know, most of us will understand that, okay, there's a lot of Bangladeshis in Hamtramck. Like, there's the stores, the clothing stores, the grocery stores, everything. But when he was working the census, the numbers in Michigan, and especially in Hamtramck, didn't show that at all. It was basically still, there was a majority Polish. I mean, it still is majority, but there was, the numbers for Bangladeshi-Americans were like close to zero. There was barely any. So his whole mentality was, numbers bring representation brings change, and representation is necessary for any type of change or well-being of any type of community. And if you don't have the numbers, you can't have representation, you can't have anything. So his whole mantra was, let's show numbers, and let's show them that we are here, and like we're here to leave a mark, So he did a lot of at that time, he did a lot of outreach in the whole greater community. He, he reached out to the very, very conservative groups of Bangladeshis, to the very, very liberal groups, and kind of was able to help bring those numbers up. And then as a result of that, I think it's very celebrated in Hamtramck, at least from the Bangladeshi point of view. We had the first not presidential, electoral ballot that was written in our language, in Bengali, and that was the first. This was the first city in the United States to do that, and so that just to bring it back to what Bill was talking about the mural. My dad, who worked for showing that we're here, we're represented by numbers through the census. But now, if we're able to pull this mural off, it would be, we're being represented through art. And that's such a great feeling. Like, yes, we know that the numbers are there. We know that we're here. We know we're being represented, maybe more so than we were before. But this is just something that when we drive down the street or walk down the street, we'll see. And it'll just, for any community that's a minority but has been around and knows that they've been around forever, it's just a really great prideful feeling. I could imagine that the Yemenis feel, and that I'm sure that we would feel as well if we saw that to be a success. Next, I'm going to, about half of my presentation is going to be about my thesis that I did, that I completed last year, which was titled Perceptions and Interactions with Authority According to Religiosity. It sounds like a mouthful, but I'll explain it. And then this is just a little bit more about, I don't think I'll have time to talk about it, but about my internship at the ACLU and the internship and research that I did in London, which was a lot focused on Islamophobia and hate crimes across the world. Next slide. Okay, so I want to start off by saying that my research is based on numbers. It's very statistical. I do not mean to offend anyone in this crowd. They are heavy subjects like Islamophobia and authority figures, which I'll explain later, but I don't mean to cause any offense or hurt anyone's feelings, or, I will be making some generalizations. The ones that I make generalizations from my research is based purely on my study, that individual study and the individual numbers. Then going forward, I will make some generalizations that have to do with Bangladeshi-Americans, and that is only based on my own experiences and how I'm connecting it to my research. So if anyone, I don't want anyone to get up in arms about, like, oh, I'm not like this and you're misrepresenting me, because we're all a community and everyone is different and everyone has individual experiences, but this is just what I've seen through my experiences and then through my research. So my thesis, it was completed last March, and basically I surveyed 307 Oakland University students, so my population were all mostly around college-age students, and they were, the students that I analyzed, they were Christians and they were Muslims. Those were the two groups that I focused on. So basically, this is, again, very, very quick snapshot of my research. I can spend hours telling you about everything that I did, but this is the major core of it. So I asked 4 main questions, and those were, are Muslim students more likely to have negative experiences with authority figures versus Christian students? Now, authority figures, I explained in my surveys were anything from police officers, college professors, teachers, supervisors, TSA, Border Patrol, anything, and then individuals are also allowed to explain what kind of authority figures they were speaking of. So the first question again is, are they more likely to have negative experiences with authority figures versus Christian students? Are they more likely to actively change their behavior? So this behavior could be daily behavior, or like that has nothing to do with religious expression, or very, very religious behavior, like something that you might wear because of your religious identity, or praying, or whatnot. Are Muslim students more likely to hesitate in expressing their religion in the presence of authority figures? So this is definitely religious expression. And are Muslim students more likely to experience differential treatment from authority figures? So the answer, which I was expecting, and the results showed from my sample, were an overwhelming yes. So again, this study is was not based to show whether there are hate crimes, or whether, like, the police are cracking down on Muslims, or if Donald Trump is seating out all the Muslims. It was more to ask the Muslim students how they feel about the authority figures in their lives, and how they are perceiving those authority figures, and how they're interacting and having experiences with these authority figures. So of the students, the Muslim students, they overwhelmingly said that they had more negative experiences with authority figures, especially when they were had in their possession religious symbols. So this was anything from a hijab to any type of religious garb. So any type of clothing, also beards that are a very big symbol of Muslim men. Long beards and head caps and things like that. So there were overwhelmingly negative experiences with authority figures. They also seemed to second guess and actively change their behavior when it came to being in the presence of authority figures. So they, in their daily behavior, day-to-day behavior, they may not say certain words that sound like maybe Arabic. They may not, they may change their clothes if it's ethnic clothes, or clothes that, let's say, like a very traditional outfit in Bangladesh is a salwar kameez. And many individuals would change that outfit before going in front of certain authority figures. That's what some of the students explained. The next is hesitated in expressing their religious identities in front of authority. A lot of individuals explained that they would change the way that they would do their hijab, which is the headscarf that Muslim women wear. A lot of students said that they wouldn't actively identify themselves as Muslims, like in a classroom setting. And a lot of the answers were based on their concern for the consequences. So it wasn't always, I had bad experiences in the past. It was more like, I'm scared that someone might, not be cool with what I'm about to say, or how the real me, so I'm just gonna keep it to myself, or I'm gonna make it easier for myself by changing these actions. Most of them felt that they were treated differently because of their religion. So some basic conclusions that we can draw from this study. It was a sociological study because I was a sociology major. So one of the major themes in that domain is that we as people, we try to conform to the dominant other, or like the dominant group in power. So if you relate this to my study, then you could say that these Muslim students were seeking to conform consciously or unconsciously to standards set by the white Christian authority figures. And so they would do things like speak in English all the time, or not, say certain, even if they're not Arabic speaking languages. For example, I don't speak Arabic, but the main language of Islam is in Arabic, so the words that I would use for God are in Arabic, so maybe they wouldn't say certain Arabic words because they would be then deviant. So they would then have to selectively express their religion, and even if in a lot of my answers, because I did a survey where there were quantitative data that I analyzed, and then there was qualitative answers where I let everyone explain where they're coming from, what their experiences were, what they change, what they second guess, all of their behaviors. And I got a lot of individuals who were Chaldean, who are Christian, but their language is very similar to Arabic. They look very similar to Arabic ethnicity people because they are from Iraq. And they had a lot of the same answers that individuals who were Muslim had, and a lot of their qualitative answers said it's because the authority figure told me it's because I look Muslim, or I sound Muslim, or my name looks Muslim. So even if you're not Muslim, looking a certain way sometimes then can cause some types of problems. So again, like even if you fit the American image, like if you've acculturated, you speak perfect English, you know how to do your hair and makeup nice, or you fit the stereotype. But if you do certain things, like one day you decide to wear what you're wearing to the mosque to a grocery store, that might make you a deviant, and that would then give you away, so to speak. So basically, people don't typically want to be deviants of a group. So Muslims in my study, were hesitant or would second guess their actions that would then make them deviant. So again, like I said before, regardless of any previous negative encounters that these individuals had, the Muslim students felt that they could in the future be subject to discrimination, and that's why they actively took precautions to hide or to hide their deviant behavior or change their behaviors from being different from the dominant other. And a lot of them also express concern that they don't want to misrepresent their religion. So one small action that is maybe impolite or rude could then be misconstrued to generalize to the rest of their religion. And so a lot of the students express that I am always on my best behavior in front of some authority figures because I don't want people to say all Muslims are like this. So this then shows that there may or may not be Islamophobia or great discrimination everywhere, but there is the perception amongst many Muslim individuals that there is criminalization and there is discrimination, which then causes them to actively protect themselves from this kind of criminalization. So in something that we would call in sociology a double consciousness is kind of, in short, would be to act differently in different contexts so that you kind of live with two different identities. So the Muslim students in my study would then be considered to have a double consciousness and live with two identities with norms and behaviors specific to each context. And this, now tying it back to, I know this talk isn't about Islamophobia, but this is kind of, I was able to then, while I was doing this study, I've seen that this can be completely, in my own experience, again, don't mean to offend anyone, but in my own experience, can be completely connected to the Bangladeshi-American experience and really all minority immigrants, minority groups that are immigrants. Next slide. So, from my personal experience, and friends of mine, cousins, etc., we come to the country, either we immigrate ourselves or our parents, we're born here and our parents are immigrants, and there's always a pressure to conform. When you're really little, you're in school, there's a pressure to conform and you're scared of being different. So I can say myself, I wanted to fit in when I was younger. How did I, everyone now, the individuals ask me, oh, you don't seem like you were born in a different country, your English is so good. But when I was younger, I watched a lot of cartoons and TV, and my English is, that's how it is. And I was younger, but I wanted to fit in with my friends I didn't live in a very diverse area, and I wanted to fit in with everyone around me. I wanted to speak English well. Bangladeshis, we know if you're a girl, your mom wants to put that oil in your hair so that you have beautiful hair. I didn't want to put that oil in my hair. First of all, it was smelly, it was oily, and everyone made fun of me. I remember specifically doing it, and people were like, what is that in your hair? That was it. My mom knows after that I never put oil in my hair. And then, you don't want to bring your biryani or your other types of ethnic food to lunch because your food smells bring out the mac and cheese, don't bring that stuff, you'll get made fun of as a child. So you try to fit in as a child. But what I've observed in my own experience is that there's a constant struggle, and there's a point in time where, if you're lucky, you become American enough, you become normal enough, you fit in enough, where then you are able, or you're allowed, nobody is actively giving you this permission, but you're allowed now in societal norms to celebrate your culture. Now, because I sound American on the phone, I can, if I, walk in somewhere with a sari on, people will be like, wow, you're so, they might give me a look, but I'll be like, hey, this is my culture, and I can defend it, and I can explain it, but, if I was just came from the country 1 year ago and I did that, I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that, or the looks that I would get would be completely different. It would be, this person just doesn't understand how things work here. It wouldn't be, wow, your culture is beautiful, good for you for doing, no, it would be, oh, let me help you, show you how things are. Let me help you dress. Let me help you fix the way you eat. Let me help you get acculturated. I hate that word, but let me help you get acculturated to the norms that are here. And this is, I think, because I am only one type of ethnicity, but I think it's very typical in most immigrant experiences. And what is interesting, and I know Bill said I spent a lot of time in Bangladesh this year, and if anybody has questions about that later, I didn't focus much on that, but what feel free to ask questions, but what I noticed, which is colonization, I think, at its best, unfortunately, is that because of globalization, the constant struggles that we as immigrants feel, or Bangladeshi-Americans feel and had to struggle with ourselves here in the United States, that now struggle exists in the country that we are from. For example, I spent so much time with my little cousins in Bangladesh this year, and my 10-year-old cousin is just asking me all about the chain smokers and this pop culture song and this song and that song, all in English, all American. And the reason he was asking me is because the coolest kids in his class, apparently they're called the Three Psychos. They're a little group, and they all listen to American music, and they're the coolest. Everybody wants to be them, and they're the coolest because they know all about American pop culture and American music. And I was like, that's so interesting. Even in Bangladesh, the heart of Bangladesh, there's a child who is now feeling out of step for being the normal, sticking to the norms that he knows, that he sees all around him, because he feels it's odd now not to know American pop culture. He has that struggle even in his own home country. He's not an immigrant yet, but he's having an immigrant experience. Next slide. Okay, so this is just a real quick, this is kind of my last point that I'm going to hit on. This is the Islamic Human Rights Commission, and I did, part of my work in London was doing an internship here last summer. And I did I helped out in the research project that they do on Islamophobia and hate crimes all over the world, really. They focus in different countries in Europe, in England, obviously, and right now they were doing it in Chicago, and I helped out in that. And they, what seemed to be, what struck out, again, I don't have numbers for this, but generalization, to me it seemed like before the age of Trump and before it would seem to be a lot more reported hate crimes in the United States just recently. There seemed to be a higher rate of hate crimes, whether they were race-oriented or religion-oriented in the heart of London, rather than in American cities. And if the numbers don't show that, I think that there's more of a perception that there is, as in individuals are more immune to things like that, and they are expecting it a lot more than I saw in communities in the United States. And there is a bigger Bangladeshi identity in the UK. I mean, in London, everyone that you see here, if I were, when I was growing up, someone would ask me, oh, where are you from? And then they'll say, oh, are you Indian? And I'll be like, nope. Try again. And they'll say, oh, are you Pakistani? And I'll be like, nope, try again. And then they'll just look at me like, what's left? There's nothing left. But, I'll be like, haha, and then I just leave, because why do I need to explain it to this person? But in London, it's not like that, In London, Bangladeshi is right up there. It might even be the first question you're asked, are you from Bangladesh? Are you Bengali? So it is, I found that it is less, the community there is a lot less apologetic, and there's a lot less explaining that needs to be done, but it still exists. For example, the very last point that I'm gonna hit on is communities, I think a lot of like Asian community, like East Asian communities, and then in our community as well, we, like I said, there's a constant struggle, and then when we become American enough, we think that, we selectively express our culture, we show it like here and there, wear a nice sari, post it on Instagram, like we do those things, and it's acceptable, but we still have internal words. For example, like fresh off the boat was originated as a very derogatory term. Meaning like someone who just came off the boat and is now here. But in our own communities, we use those words. If Bill came to me and told me, hey, like you're a fob, you're a boater, I would be like, okay, Bill, we're done here. We're no friendship. But in immigrant communities, it does exist where we're allowed to make fun of one another if we do something that is a little too or home culture oriented. There's a very strict system, there's a very strict rule book that you have to follow that is unconscious. No one, says that this is what you have to do, but if you don't follow it perfectly, like we, in our mind, we think, okay, like, that person is acting like a fob, or that person is acting like a boater. These are words that we use, and we don't think of them as rude to one another. It's just, oh, haha, it's a joke. But, you have to think about where these came from and why we're using them. And like I said, the UK community is a lot, there's a lot less explaining that goes on, but they have those words just as much as we do, They call each other, we have different words for it. They'll call them fresh or freshies, and we're here calling them fobs and boaters, but, it still exists. And I think it's a phenomenon that exists in most of the world that has been colonized, where we are constantly struggling between this notion of, okay, we're going to celebrate our culture, we're going to be ourselves, but only how and when it's acceptable to ourselves. And that's nothing to feel bad. Like sometimes I think like, oh, should I be feeling bad? And no, I feel comfortable that I'm expressing my culture how I want to and when I want to. But it is something that in the bigger scope of things, I think is a little unfortunate, because it's kind of like this whole, I don't want to use the word brainwash, but it's kind of how our child psychology now, like we were told as children to, be a certain type, and now we're trying to go back and figure out how we can bring back like how we were as a child, or how our parents, wanted us to be, or their culture. And so I think it's like a back and forth of accepting your culture and also accepting the American culture. So that's all. If you have any questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Farha Hanif. That was a very personal, very beautiful presentation. Thank you. It's funny, she brought up many interesting points. I think the fob and the boater experience also happens in the African American community with the N-word. If I ever use that word, and I never do, it's offensive. But a lot of times it's used among themselves, and it's acceptable. I also have another interesting experience where I work in the music business, so I travel a lot of restaurants and hotels and stuff, and I always see, when I see an Asian guy working there, I always go up to him and I say, if I can sense it, I say, are you Bangladeshi? And 9 times out of 10 they're Bangladeshi, because I know what Bangladeshi look like. I live here, they're the largest community here. And I said, I bet you're from Hamtramck too. He says, yeah, how'd you know? Because I'm from Hamtramck, and that's, when you live together with people, you get to know them, and you can see the differences. I live in America, and I can't tell the differences from some people in the South. For example, they have dialects that they can tell each other where they're from, but I'm trying to learn voices and stuff like that. But that's, I think, one of the ways to solve the problems of Islamophobia and stuff is once you understand the other person is very similar to you, they have the same concerns, the same emotions, the same needs in life, and we can eventually learn to live together. That's the ultimate goal. But anyways, living in another country is always difficult, not only being a Bangladeshi-American, but being an American going to Japan or whatever, you know, you got to learn their culture and you got to do. But we're talking about different kinds of discrimination. There's economic and social discrimination and racism. And I mean, that's a substantial, that can affect your lives, and that's a lot different than being insulted by a person who calls you the wrong name or makes fun of the way you look or whatever. But when you're actually denied access to housing or income or health care or whatever sort of discrimination affects your lives, it's something different. So this next speaker we have here is going to address points like this, and I wanted to get my paper one more time because she has a long list of credentials here, and I'm not going to read them all, but I'm just going to at least say a few. She's a graphic designer and a lawyer who practiced in Flint, poverty law. She practiced there. She worked in prisoners' rights litigation and interned in international criminal law and war crimes for the United Nations in The Hague. She's also the co-founder and executive of the group called Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative, an organization which focuses on racial justice. Her legal background includes research on racism, global educational standards, and the UN Declaration on Human Rights Education training. She served on the boards of multiple Muslim student organizations, and that's just the first part of it. The rest we'll learn about. So let's please welcome for the first time here on our stage in Hamtramck, Namirah Islam.
Thank you, Bill. You did end up reading almost all of it, but no, I'm so glad to be here. So I wanted to kind of go through a little bit of like my childhood experience as well. So my parents, like my dad came to do his master's at Wayne State back in the 80s. My mom came a little bit after that. But when I was born, we lived in Detroit for about 2.5 years. And at that point, it was an apartment building, and my parents later, like, they would tell stories about it. My mom more so than my dad. But there was a lot of other Bengali families in the building. So there were a lot of stories about going across the hall with that auntie and going upstairs and going downstairs. And so there was a number of families that were all together in that building. But, you know, my dad, he graduated, he had a degree from engineering, he graduated from Buet back in Bangladesh, you know, so when he came here, he got a job immediately with General Motors, and he was there for about 30 years before he passed away a couple years ago. So when they lived in that building, obviously they went through that kind of typical, you know, immigrant story where he came with very little and then ended up, when I was 2.5, he moved out to the suburbs. So we kind of, you know, went through that path of white flight as soon as he was able to get a more like salaried job. And, you know, the story that they tell is that apparently there were like little bugs in that building, and I was like 2.5, and he saw me about to reach out and eat one of them. So he was like, "We're leaving, we're moving." But after that, we like lived in Livonia for a few years, and then I graduated from Novi High School. So that was kind of that process, though. There were a number of things, and I'm so glad to be here because actually, like, thinking about Bengali identity, about Bangladeshi-American identity has been something I've been exploring a lot more in the last 2 years in particular. And as I've been looking back on it, it's kind of interesting to see the different aspects of it. And so for me, my mom was adamant, no English with her, right? Like, we were gonna speak in Bangla, I'm gonna learn it, I'm gonna talk with my relatives. Like, she would show us, it was like, because we would go up going to Bangladesh every 4 years. And so she actually would have like photographs of my relatives and like test us for like, do you know their names? Like, who is this? And we'd be like, Fupi, and like, you know, this is like Chochokala and like stuff like that. So when we went back, we would actually recognize people and be able to engage. And so with my cousins, even though I saw them once every 4 years, it still felt like they were family. And there was still that sense of, and, you know, especially like my mom's side of the family has been so welcoming and open. It's been very easy to just be like, yeah, we're part of this family, even though obviously we missed a lot, right, growing up here. And then on top of that, one of the other things that when I was young, my mom actually put me into like Bangla, like classical singing lessons for about 2 years, and then I quit. So, but you know, she has a tape of me like singing at one of the cultural concerts when I was like 5, and I guess somebody had given me a piece of gum before I got up on stage, and I didn't throw it out, so I'm up there like smacking like the gum and like singing like some little song, right? But I ended up quitting, and one of the things that with like that process, especially growing up here in the suburbs. So 9/11 happened when I was in 10th grade. And before that, like, even though they put me in cultural singing lessons, you know, even though we made sure to speak Bangla at home, even with when my grandparents, my dad's parents had come to stay with us for a couple years, and so my my like dida and like my dadi, like they would make sure to like actually teach us Bangla like writing, and because we didn't grow up like learning how to read or write, but like we didn't get very far, and it was a very like informal kind of experience. Whereas for like going to Sunday school, like I was in Sunday school since I was like 9, right? And I started taking like tajweed classes to read Quran and, you know, classical Arabic and all of that. And that was much more formal. Like they made sure to pay to make that happen. And so when 9/11 happened, you know, growing up in Novi, I remember like as a kid in like 2nd grade, 3rd grade, the main topic I would get would be like, your last name's in the dictionary. And I'm like, yeah, you know. But they realized how common a last name it was, even from other Muslims. They'd be like, your last name is Islam? And I'm like, do you realize how many Bengali Islams there are in the state of Michigan? Like, come on. But it was very uncommon out there. And so I grew up with a much more, like, in touch with the cultural identity, the ethnic identity, rather than the religious identity. And there was one time in 3rd grade, and this is like one of the first stories and experiences I really remember of feeling othered, was they had been talking, you know, I was new to this school at that point. We had just moved to Novi. And it was this little kid named Cal, and he's talking about like what people had for dinner or something last night. And I was like, oh, yeah, you know, like, we had lobster last night. And he's like looking at me, and he's like, wait, what? And I'm like, lobster? And he's like, do you mean lobster? And they all started laughing. And I was like, oh, yeah, because we do the stairs in a school. And, like, we do that. And so I had repeated that in school. And especially as the oldest kid, like, it had taken me longer to learn English. So those, like, experiences, I had a lot more of that, you know, my cultural identity. And then 9/11 happened. And even though I had identified more so as Asian up until, what, I was like 14, 15 at the time, right? So I had identified much more as Asian. And then I remember sitting there, and we're in like some civics class or something, and watching it on TV. And I was like, wait, like, they're not gonna think that this was like my people? Like, is this, like, how is this related? And for the first time, really thinking about that concept of like, okay, Muslim identity. And I think that really goes back into that, how kind of society is structured here with the conflation of Muslim and Arab, right? So you kind of have to pick. You're like, are you Muslim or are you Asian? You know, are you Muslim or are you black? Are you Muslim or are you white? You know, and so it's only for like Middle Eastern identities, or even like Pakistani too, but like you have to pick. You know, you can only, with the conflation right now with Islamophobia, it's like Muslims have been racialized, right, into just another ethnic group. And so at that point, that's kind of what happened with me. So by the time I got to college, at that point I didn't wear the hijab, I didn't wear the headscarf. I started when I got involved with the Muslim Student Association on campus. And I was at University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. So when I got involved, and it was because I had designed the cover for a newsletter, and that was literally the only reason, hey, you do graphic design? Okay, you're gonna be on our board next year. I was like, okay, sure. So I ended up on the board, but, you know, through that process of like 6 months of going to, you know, to halaqah and to other events, and, you know, just getting more in touch with my kind of religious, like faith, exploring faith a little bit more, I did start wearing the headscarf, and there was definitely more of this, like, you know, thinking about how to be Muslim in America, you know, and that was kind of what I would talk about all the time. And then within a year, I ended up being part of the Bengali Student Association on campus, and that had just started up, and so it was a new organization, and I had kind of left the Muslim space to be part of, you know, the president of the Bengali Student Association. And I think that, like, that's certainly been one area of my life that has been repeated in some ways, because obviously when you're kind of, and this is what I wanted to get into, was, I mean, the identity aspect of being Bengali, of being Bangladeshi, of speaking Bangla, but not really being represented in American Muslim spaces, that has been a reality. And that's been very difficult over the past, you know, few years to really navigate. But in general, you know, after the Bengali Student Association work, after that, I think there was definitely this kind of feeling of, okay, there's a lot of information I'm missing about my own identity. And even though my mom, we grew up hearing a lot of stories, you know, and we would ask her about things, ask my dad about things, but we still didn't really have that much of a cultural, like almost like a curriculum, right? Thinking of like the stuff we should know. I mean, the first time that we ended up hearing about even the war for independence, for example, was because I'd come home from Sunday school saying that the Pakistani aunties were treating me weird. Like, I felt weird because I was like a little pet for most of the aunties in the area because I was one of the only little kids at the time. So I like was used to being all the aunties like, you know, being really nice to me. And in that space, I was, you know, they would speak to me in Urdu, and I would tell them, even though I understood Urdu because we grew up watching Bollywood, I couldn't really respond really well, so I'd be like, oh, I speak Bangla, I speak Bangla. But they would still insist on talking to me in Urdu. And at the time, like, they would be telling me to go get their husband or whatever, right? But they would be really mean. And so I came home, and I was maybe like 8 or 9, and I told my mom, and I was like, I don't get why they're mean to me, I don't understand. She was like, what are they doing? And so then I explained. And then at that point, she was like, well, you know, there was actually a war between Pakistan. Like, Bangladesh was East Pakistan. And I was like, wait, what? You know, like, what are you talking about? And then she was like, yeah, you know, and it was over language. And, you know, we sometimes see these different problems, right? And we thought, like, and I was like, why didn't you say anything to us, right? Like, I was 9 at the time. She's like, well, I just figured that we're here in the United States, you know, we're all Muslim. I thought these problems would have gone away, or that we wouldn't have carried it over here, like these tensions would fall away with your generation. And so that was my first experience kind of being othered in like even the Muslim space, right? But based on that, like there has been kind of this progression through my life of trying to figure out more about my own ethnic identity. And I think like after college, during law school, at that point I was like very much like, you know, like it wasn't just like, oh, I'm Desi. Like that was kind of what I did in undergrad. It was, I'm Desi, you know. We're all from the same area, we all have similar culture. And then I was like, no, I'm Bangladeshi. So yeah. But one of the things that really has been cemented, especially when my dad got sick, you know, he passed away from lung cancer, actually, it'll be 2 years in July. So one of the things that when he passed away, I've been thinking about this a lot more because it was always my kind of impression as a kid that like, oh, I'll have time with them to explore that identity more. Like I will talk to him more about, you know, his experiences. He grew up in this small village next to the Jomuna River, you know, and like he would talk about fishing and he put like bees in a pen one time and took it home to prank his mom or something. And I was just like, what, you know? But, you know, he talked about the fish and how big they were and all that stuff. But I never really got to explore his life the way that I heard about my mom's because he was always like more quiet and my mom was like the storyteller in the family. So with his identity, like when he kind of passed away and his story, like I have the general framework of it, but there's a lot of details that are missing. And I think growing up now and thinking and looking back now, I'm just like, I wish that there was, you know, more of a way to make sure that we're exploring all that as second generation in the United States because we lose it. And, you know, I'm looking and I'm having this conversation with my mom because we were looking at her like shari closet and there's like so many sharis in there, right? And I was just like, what are we gonna do with all of these like saris, right? And so then she's like, okay, well there's 3 of you, there's me and my 2 sisters. She's like, okay, if I split all of the shari, like sharis like 3 ways, you're not gonna each have like a lot, right? And I just like looked at her and I was like, okay, but you guys have like a dawah like every weekend, so you guys wear these, like where are we gonna wear them? You know, like, and we were just thinking about that reality of like being second generation and how quickly we lose it in some ways. Like I can't wear a shari without help from my mom, you know, to do the pleats. Like I can't do it by myself. And when we look at like our generation, I'm like, are we having like a dawah every month even, you know, like with the other Bengalis in the family, you know, or in the area? To where we're going to be getting dressed up, and even if we do get dressed up, like I don't know the difference between like jamdani and like silk and like all these different like, you know, kind of like, oh, this was fancier, you wear it at a wedding, but like I don't know a lot of this information, or even cooking, or like a lot of these like cultural, like such important aspects of our ethnicity, or like our ethnic heritage, that I just don't know. And in some ways it's sad because like I can read classical Arabic and can write classical Arabic, but I can't read and write Bangla, right? And I'm like trying to teach myself now, and it's slow. And that's always been this tension, and so I want to just like end on kind of that experience, especially doing the work at MuslimArc. So with MuslimArc, like one of our main missions, one of our main goals for education is to make sure that we are amplifying and centering narratives of Muslims who are underrepresented. So for example, Black Muslims are the largest ethnic group of Muslims in the United States. That is not what you see in the media, right? Even for, you know, Bengali Muslims, when you look at kind of some of the statistics, like back in 1993, there was a finding that Bengali Muslims are the second largest ethnic group of Muslims in the entire world is that represented in the narrative about Muslims, right? And there's very specific cultural, influences to religion as well, and how we approach religion. And that's been kind of my experience, is that like I didn't grow up, seeing a single Bengali Muslim speaker at a Muslim conference ever. And so now when I go across the country and I'll speak, when I was in Nashville a couple years back, there was like an entire Bangladeshi contingent, right? Where it was like 3 generations of women who decided to come to this women's conference only because all they knew about me was that I was also Bangladeshi. And they had shown up, and it was like the nani, and like, the nani and the mom and the daughters and like all these people, right? And that was it. And that was the only reason they showed up, and they were so supportive. And I've seen that in multiple places across the country at this point. And it's because like we're underrepresented. Our voices, our stories, I think when we think about a lot of the narrative about American Muslims, it goes back to what Farha was talking about assimilation and all of that. And so we celebrate kind of the model minority narrative about, the good minorities, the ones who got educated and did a good job and blah, blah, they don't cause any trouble, and all of that. Whereas when we look at the economic kind of profile of Muslims overall, and you see Bengalis as a large part of this, you have people who are lower income, who are dealing with undocumented immigration issues, right? I just actually got a text like 2 minutes ago saying like there's an auntie that, an uncle's texting me to have an attorney because she's undocumented and she's going through problems right now. That's an issue. Poverty is an issue, for the community. And these are things that really do matter. When, there was the aunties who were assaulted in New York, right? There was the series of murders that happened last summer where the one auntie was killed like a few feet from her house. There was the imam and his assistant who were killed walking down the street from the masjid. And these are things that have happened across the country, but we don't really get to center these stories in a way that's often relevant to the community at large. And that experience of going through and trying to do that and get more representation has been difficult in many ways because we get erased a lot. But I think there's a lot of strength as well. I've walked into Black Muslim majority spaces and they've been like, oh, you're Bengali? You get it. and the reason, part of it is, one, because we went through revolution within our parents' lifetimes, right? So there's a lot of narrative around standing up against injustice, right? Or standing up against oppression, or fighting for revolution or for liberation, or these concepts and these narratives are strong within our community. We've been trained a little bit differently to think about what it means to disrupt, right? Or to like say that, no, this isn't gonna stand. We don't accept this. And so based on those stories, it's something that's certainly been passed down to me through my family. I remember growing up, my mom is related to a political family in Bangladesh, so I will put that out there, but I grew up listening to like speeches, right, from the war, like before the war, and she would play them every year, and I would listen to them, and there's kind of that understanding that like we're a people who fight, and we stand up for what's right, and that has been instilled in me since I was a young kid, and it's a very cultural thing. So based on all of these different things, I'm still definitely exploring that aspect of being Bangladeshi in America with that idea of ethnicity and religion and how we're kind of shuffled into this kind of, we're Asian, but then we're Muslim, and some of us who are not Muslim, like what does that mean? But for me personally, that's kind of been, a snapshot into what we've been, exploring throughout my life, but I've really been thinking about this in specific ways over the last 2 years in particular, just because of the lack of representation when I walk into a space and the assumption that kind of, some of the values that other people at space hold, I must know them. And so I'm used to a little bit more having to understand other people's culture, but then people not really understanding mine, or not really understanding certain, when somebody else will say kind of a joke or any Bollywood reference, general, I'll get it, but if I try to reference Dhaka or something, they're kind of looking at me where is that again, or for example, I was in, we grew up going every 4 years, but there was a huge break when I was in undergrad, so I was in Dhaka last summer. My aunt had passed away, and so we went, and I was only there for a week, but I was there, that terrorist attack had happened, right, near Gulshan, and so I was around that area at the time. And so it was interesting just to see kind of the reaction, both while I was there And then while when I came back and like on social media, I would like get texts and stuff, right? But while I was there, I mean, obviously there's like my cousins and my cousins' husbands and spouses back there, like a lot of them, you know, are very in touch with what's going on. We're all friends on Facebook and all of that stuff. And I remember at one point we were kind of, you know, debating switching our plans for the afternoon, that we were like, oh, maybe we shouldn't go somewhere because this attack had just happened and what if there's another one? And one of my cousin's husband just looks at me and he's like, so you live in the United States where you guys have people who come into movie theaters and elementary schools and shoot them up, and you're afraid of changing your plans here? And I was just like, that's a good point. But you know, it's kind of that understanding for us here. I think I'm just really glad at this point to be able to kind of question the dominant narrative, to be able to look at the media headlines and realize like, okay, these are crafted in a certain way. And I think when you work in something like racial justice, you end up being able to read a lot more of like the people's history of the United States, right? And from there, you start thinking a lot more about a people's history of the world. And we look at things like with Rana Plaza and with labor rights violations, with the cheap clothes that we have, but who's making them, right? And who's been invisibilized in that kind of labor. What are these aspects of our narrative that are not in the mainstream media, that are not even within our own spaces sometimes, right? Even within the AAPI space. So the Asian American Pacific Islander kind of organizing space, you know, is the Bengali narrative there. And that's been something over the last, you know, few months that I've been working on, is like reconciling Asian versus Muslim and being back in that space and breaking down some of those barriers where I have to pick one or the other. But there's so many different stories and there's so many narratives, and I'm just really grateful to be able to explore that and especially to talk about it here with you all. So thank you.
Thank you, Namirah Islam. So we're going to ask Namirah and Farha to come up and have a seat here, and we're going to open the discussion up to involve all of you if you have questions or statements. Who has something to say first, or a question you have for our speakers? Okay, we'll start here with this gentleman. You want to come up here, or you want to just, see if you can come here, because this mic's not that long, unfortunately.
So I enjoy both of you as speakers. I appreciate it very much. So my question is, since we're not part of the dominant society, the dominant culture, and we talk about mosaic versus melting pot, we're melting pot, they want us to integrate and lose our culture. How do we get the dominant culture then to recognize us and our potential and to learn more about us versus us having to give up our culture and become more part of the mainstream?
Thank you. You could give them the mic and then they'll, Thank you.
No, thank you for that question. So, I mean, there's certainly a lot to think about, right? When we're thinking about assimilation and dominant narratives and all of that. I think one thing that is really crucial is education, to start with, just because, as you mentioned, we're kind of, that pressure to assimilate is so strong. And one of the things that happens is, like, within generations, you start losing information. And I think right now with some of, obviously I look toward Black activists, Black thinkers, to just really think about how has that happened throughout the centuries here, because my family is relatively new to the United States. But that reality of making sure to teach your kids about your own story and about your own narrative, to make sure that people have pride in their own story. Because right now what happens is that we don't learn it. We accept some of the dominant stuff, and then we, one good example that my sisters and I have been talking about is kind of even the norms around how you interact with your parents, right? Especially when you become an adult child. Obviously, like for a lot of, cultures that are from abroad, the Bangladeshi culture, you have a lot of respect for your elders. You might even live together in joint family kind of situations. But you don't just kind of call your mom once on Mother's Day and you're like, that's it, right? And my mom as a kid would be like, every day is Mother's Day, so, right? And there's that kind of attitude, but one thing here that happens is that because that pressure when you're going to public school and when you're consuming American mainstream media and when you're doing all of that, is you even lose the information yourself, much less be able to talk about how to engage with the mainstream dominant narrative. So once it's like education within our spaces, education within our community, that's really crucial. And then once that happens, I think there needs to be a sense of that you're not going to necessarily yield that narrative. And that happens a lot in my work because we'll do certain campaigns. For example, Muslim Arc, we had a campaign after the Charleston shooting when a lot of the Black churches were targeted by arson. We were like, okay, we understand, like Islamic centers, mosques, and other centers have been vandalized and targeted by arson as well. This is a history of, in the United States, with anything that doesn't fit within the dominant narrative being attacked violently. So we're gonna raise money. And the campaign went viral. You know, it's called Rebuild with Love, and we raised over $100,000. But in that process of the media narrative, it turned into, look, Muslims getting along with Christians. And it just, that was the narrative, and it was going full steam ahead, right? Where it's just being used as almost like a PR campaign to be like, look, Muslims aren't as bad as we thought. You know, they can get along with Christians. And we're like, no kidding. Like, you know, like, yes, we can. Like, that's not the point. And so one of the things that we really had to do was to get, you know, when we do these interviews, to talk about, hey, this is the reason we're doing this campaign. And not just accept what they're handing us to say, like, yeah, you know, yeah, this is easy. You know, like, you could just deal with it. And so it is tough because it's that constant pushing it back, constant reframing, constant recentering of of our narrative within those dominant spaces. But the more of us that are there, the more of us that are trained in kind of the media world and are producing our own media and content, the easier that we can do it. And I think it's very important because ultimately, and I said this earlier this week in like a corporate space, and I was saying, when we talk about things like social justice, there's the way that it's framed is that somebody's going to lose out. It's like a zero-sum game, that if one person benefits, the other person loses, or the other community loses. And I was saying, that's not what this is. You know, from a spiritual perspective, from a moral perspective, a lot of what we're doing right now when it comes to social justice is about benefiting all of us. It is in everyone's best interest to make sure that we are pushing back against oppression, that we're dealing with systemic issues of racism and of injustice. That's of benefit to every single person, because it is a spiritual illness and a moral illness for somebody to be oppressing somebody else. And so from that perspective too, it's like the dominant narrative, like you benefit too, right? Like the dominant narrative needs to be better representative of who's here and who's doing the work and who's part of this country, right? So in a nutshell, I think that would be my answer.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo what she is saying, first of all, obviously education of your children. Like I can say personally, like growing up, a lot of my classmates had a lot of my classmates had grandparents who were World War II veterans, right? And I thought, oh my gosh, that is so amazing. Like, wow, they fought in the war that we are reading about in my textbook. And then, you know, a few years later, months later, whenever I don't remember exactly when I learned about the history of the liberation war in Bangladesh, but I was like, oh, okay, like my dad's friends fought in the war, they're there, you know, and like that again, like what she's saying is about teaching your children your culture, and then from that it's like the most basic answer, but representation in every avenue of our culture. So yeah, we're in America, we are thrown into this dominant culture that, you know, is so big and you can't ever get anywhere. You feel like you're chipping away at one corner, but I mean, that's how it happens, right? I mean, change is such a word that, like, you know, if you just look in tunnel vision, like change doesn't happen like years and years. Yes, President Obama is there and there's a black, but it's like what really changed, you know? It's a long process, but how do we get there is representation in every avenue. Like I would say, like what she was saying about creating your own media, kind of what I was talking about before, about like celebrating your culture and like, let's say, like feeling comfortable wearing some kind of ethnic clothing. I mean, if it wasn't for like Instagram and YouTube and all these like makeup artists and things showing us like, oh, look how beautiful I am in this like sari, and like, you know, like people maybe would feel less comfortable wearing their ethnic clothing and wearing, you know, their doing things associated with their culture, but because they see that in mainstream culture being celebrated, they want to now go ahead and do that. And then finally, like I would say, like especially for the Bangladeshi community, you know, like representation. One of the reasons that I wanted to go into, obviously I'm not a law student right now, but one of the reasons that I wanted to go into law school was because I looked around and, in my community, in my direct community of Bangladeshi-Americans, there are very, very few lawyers. And, I think I used to always think about if I'm in a problem right now, if I am in a hate crime or something like that, who would I go to? And I look at the Arab community, and they have organizations, big organizations. They have access, and they have care, and they have lawyers who would come to their aid. And I know that if I go to care, of course they'll welcome me and help me. But it's not my ethnicity. It's not my culture, right? Nowhere in care does it say this is for this culture, or this ethnicity. But it's just what makes up. So what I'm trying to say is there's a definite, in every culture, in every race, there's a lack of some type of there's a lack of representation in all of the career fields. Bangladeshis, what do we go into majority? What do our parents do? Engineers, doctors. That's the very technical fields that we go into. But what are we missing? Why are we maybe not represented in the Muslim media? Why do they not maybe think of us that way? Because we aren't in that spectrum for a lot of the time. We're not there. We're not the ones creating the content. We're not the ones saying, hey, look at me, I'm a hijabi woman and I'm Muslim and I'm Bangladeshi. And that is a lot of the issue, is that we're not there. So I would say, just basically echoing what she's saying, but it's all about representation. It's slow, but it's how I think we would go forward.
Okay, so we're gonna informalize this event now. I'm just gonna go without a mic out here. Anybody who wants to speak, and then the answer, keep them short if you can, and the answer is short, and then we'll try to get everybody in if whoever wants to speak. Just very informal. Raise your hand if you want to say something. You can either go up, use a mic. Okay, you can stand there, or you can use the mic. You're next.
It wasn't until I started college that I really began to make friends with Pakistani students, as opposed to the kind of Bengali the Bengali kids that I've kind of grown up here in Hamtramck being friends with. And one thing that I was so shocked to find one day, so I was talking to a friend one day, and she told me that she's Pakistani, and she told me that she herself began to research the war that our two countries had, and she was shocked to find how many rapes occurred. How many of the Pakistani soldiers raped a Bangladeshi woman. And when she told her dad about it, he told her that's not true. Those were Indian soldiers dressed up as Pakistani soldiers that did that. And I guess, that's just one of a number of kind of weird microaggression encounters that I've had. And I guess it's so interesting to see that type of, the hostility still very much exists within the older generation, our parents' generations, but it also has, permeated in, among people my own age. So how do you, navigate, and I, this one weird thing, once this girl told me, oh, you're so pretty, I thought you were Pakistani, and it's those backhand, it's a weird compliment, and you're okay, and she's no, well, Bengalis usually have a darker complexion. And I was okay, but what does that have anything to do with, of course shadism runs deep in our, South Asian communities, but it's these weird microaggressions you have, and that still very much exist, not only in the older generation, but within people our own age. So, and you see it sometimes in Instagram, Irene Mahmood, she's a popular Bengali makeup artist, and you see it on her comments, the Pakistani and Bengali girls just go at it, and how do you navigate that, and why, is it too, am I too much of is it too relativist to think that, oh, we should be happy-go-lucky, that shouldn't happen, we should work together more, that was in the past. So I guess, how do you think about that, and how do you really kind of process it and navigate it? And one more thing. Sorry, I just have more questions. Even and something else. Did you see that when you were in England?
Yeah.
And did you? Because I know in England there are more. Here in Hamtramck it's predominantly Bengalis. There aren't many Pakistanis here, but I know in England there are more there's a better, more balanced mixture between communities that are Pakistani and Bengalis. And did you see that like type of hostility happen in the youth that are in those communities?
All right, so that is lots of questions, and they're great. Okay, so yeah, let me start with a little anecdote. So when I was in second grade, okay, I had, my best friend was Mona. She was Pakistani. Her whole family was Pakistani, obviously. My whole family loved their family and everything. And I had a best friend who was a first grader. I think maybe it might have been third grade. And then the girl was a second grader, and she was Bangladeshi. And one day, like, this girl, the first grader, or whatever grade she was, the Bangladeshi, she had no idea about the Pakistani girl, okay, because different classes, she doesn't know. And one day she saw me with her, and she asked me where she was from. I was like, oh, Pakistan. And then she looked at me, and she was like, why do you talk to her? Like, don't you know what they did to our country? And I'm like, what? No, like, I don't know what you're talking about. She's like, don't talk to her after today. And I'm like, okay, like, okay, sure, I won't talk to her. You know, I mean, I don't think you are at all I don't think you're wrong in any way thinking that we can coexist at all. I mean, like, I'm gonna single her out because she knows probably is coming, but like one of my best friends is Pakistani, you know? Yeah, she's right there. But I mean, it's not a matter of like, can we coexist or not? Because I think we can see that in the history of all countries, especially when you come to an area where there are individuals of other ethnicities and you've had a conflict in the past. Yes, that still exists, but there's always ways to come past it. I think the biggest thing is talking, and I know that's like it gets, like you said, like Irene's comments, they're so volatile, and so, but I think it's important. Like, okay, like look at all of history, right? Even today we say there's no racism because slavery ended. And slavery ended, and then any hate crime that happened after that is just brushed under the rug. Like, it didn't happen. It's not happening. We're all good right now. We've come so far is what right? Like, women's rights has come so far. Like, minority rights have come so far. It doesn't exist anymore. So yeah, and I'm sure this is very similar in a lot of other countries that have had to apologize for war crimes and things like that. There is that mentality that, like, you know, who wants to see them bad selves in the mirror, like, right? You don't want to focus on what you did badly, and especially that situation where, like, politically there might be that denial. When you come to this country, I think the great thing that we do have is the fact that I would say, like, it's half and half. I think for half of the younger generation, we are able to let that go. And I think also this is going to be a little, I don't have any stats or anything, but if you look at, like, our marriages, there's, from when I was younger, there's like a much more significant number of Bangladeshis and Pakistanis getting married. And that didn't happen, you know, even in our lives, probably it didn't happen because, I mean, the war was just yesterday, and, you know, marriages in our culture is about, you know, families coming together. So if there's so much hostility, you're not going to have the families coming together. So I think that it's definitely possible to coexist, and I think we're going in the right direction. But I think the biggest thing is talking, and I think we are in a good position because the most of the hostility is in our parents' generation because they saw it and they feel it. We do feel it, but we're in that good situation where we have I probably have more similarities with my friend who is Pakistani than my mom and her mom might have. You know, like, we grew up here. We have similar experiences, so we can connect, I feel, a little bit more than it would be much harder for your friends or the girls' parents or whoever that is denying it. It would be much easier to have that kind of conversation. I know it doesn't completely answer the question, but in regards to London, I think that, like I said, because there is a large Bangladeshi population there, I think there is so in London there is East London, Aldgate, which is completely Bengali. Like, it's 100%, like, there's it's completely Bangladeshi people, and they have their own community. Like, they're very, very strong. They're probably the most populated in the world, like that concentrated there. And then there is also a very vibrant Pakistani community. Then there is also a very, very large Muslim community in London. And I feel like that Muslim community, compared to what you were talking about, in London, it's heavily occupied by Bangladeshi people, heavily occupied. I think I personally think in the city of London, I think there is a more of a representation of Bangladeshi people in the Muslim arena than there are in Pakistani people. That was just from my experience, but that's what it seemed like to me. So I think that, I think right now, the more people that, like the more concentrated it is, I feel like, because London is so small, you know, and that's why they all kind of have to live on top of each other and close to each other. I think that the more concentrated you are, for some reason, I think that it's easier to coexist when you're the minority and you're all together than when you are getting by on your own well enough and you don't have to. And I feel like that's a lot of what we have here. Like, you know, we're in our own community in the suburbs. Like, we don't need each other to survive. So maybe that could like continue for some tension. But yeah, and the other day my friend was telling me how she was like, oh yeah, you know, like this person told me that oh my god, I've never seen, you're like the prettiest Bengali I've seen. It was actually at OU, funnily enough. It was an MSA meeting. But you know, that happens, and you know, the best thing, again, it comes back to representation, right? You go there, you show your pretty face, and you know, like it comes back to representation and showing that you exist as a Muslim and you're just as good.
So because I've been exploring this issue a little bit more for the past 2 years, like there was a moment starting last year, I still need to write this, but I had asked a lot of people, like, what are some of the things that you've heard, kind of the anti-Bangladeshi kind of statements. And it was kind of horrifying, some of the things that people ended up sending. And my sister actually mentioned this for the first time. She was an undergrad when I was in law school, so she didn't tell me this at the time, but later she was like, yeah, you know, I was talking to this one girl, and she's Pakistani, and she knows that I'm Bangladeshi, and she just looked at me and she goes, well, Indians hate Pakistanis, and Pakistanis hate Indians, but everybody knows that Bangladeshis hate themselves. And she just said it straight to my sister's face, right? And it's like statements like that. There was one that was a little bit more horrifying where somebody had said to somebody else that, you know, their skin tone was a little bit lighter, which, as most of us have in our family, it's like the wide range of skin tones, right, from light to dark. But they had said, this young man actually had said to somebody else, and I apologize if this is like hard to hear, but that she was light-skinned, oh, she must have been assaulted during, like her parents must have been assaulted during the war. And that's why she was born with lighter skin, because a Pakistani was the father. Kind of glibly joking about sexual assault and rape, right? And so something like that is within second generation sometimes, right? And it was a young man who said this, born and raised in the United States. So one thing that, for me, like my time at the United Nations when I interned there, it was for a war crimes tribunal. And this is for the situation in the former Yugoslavia, and they're prosecuting people for war crimes. But this is over an incident that took place in the 1990s, right, in Bosnia. So when we're looking back at an atrocity like this, where the statistics are kind of, you know, you'll hear varying numbers of how many people were even killed. You'll hear varying narratives about who was responsible and all of this stuff, right? There's a lot of misinformation out there, and me personally, like I had asked on Facebook, of all places, I had asked for reading on the war because I was like, I don't know enough, and there's different stories. And so somebody had sent me this link to this book, and I was like looking at the Amazon description, and somebody put in the comments for the reviews, they were like, oh, this is like propaganda from the Pakistani side, because it's downplaying how many people were killed and how bad it was and all of that, right? And one of the functions of something like a tribunal, which the United Nations has its problems, so I'm not going to get into that too much, but the idea is that to even talk about what happened and what the facts are, and then to hold people accountable for crimes that were committed. The closest thing we had was the tribunal in Bangladesh, and that was only prosecuting Bengalis, right? And even that, there was issues with the legal procedures that they were having, that the United Nations and their human rights bodies were calling them out for not having proper trial procedures. So when you're looking at kind of what has happened since the war, in terms of that idea of like a truth and reconciliation, you know, kind of endeavor that's happened in many other countries that have faced this kind of internal or intra-ethnic, or, you know, two countries that are next to each other, which they're not, but like, you know, like, there have been other countries that have dealt with very formal procedures in order to bring communities together, in order to have some kind of closure, in order to have some kind of justice, in order to even get an apology, right? And we have not had that. And that's something that I think possibly could be done here. I don't know, like, if there's an interest in bringing this all back, or if people just want to forget it and move on. I don't know if it's necessarily something that would be even feasible. I don't know the logistics of it, but like, it is important, and that is a reason why it's traditionally been done, is so people can move forward. And that way, some of these microaggressions that you mentioned, some of these things that come up, they're not dealt with because we haven't had like an open conversation about even what led to the possibility of genocide, right? Because genocide includes dehumanization. And so when you dehumanize another group, you can say things like, you know, that the other group is lesser. And so even among some of the like the Pakistani Bengali marriages, you know, there was one of my friends who got married. The girl was Pakistani, and her childhood friends, like a lot of them just kind of were like, didn't want to get involved with the wedding stuff, right? Like they were there, but not really, like, because she was marrying a Bengali guy. And so some of these things still, you know, we still deal with it. The colorism issue is like rampant, right? But I think it's very important to think about like what are the next steps, because one of the issues with dehumanization is that if you don't take active measures to counteract it, it just keeps going. And it obviously needs to be taught to children, it needs to be taught that way, so obviously some of these kids are hearing their parents say these things, but at the same time some of us don't hear anything, you know, we grow up without any knowledge. I had one Pakistani acquaintance of mine say that she grew up in Pakistan, and even the textbooks, the way they even described the conflict, they didn't even call it a war, like it was just this like random little conflict that happened and it was over very quickly. And so even the textbooks there, like the narratives are very specific. So, I mean, it is a really important question, I think, for the community here. Like, obviously, we have spaces that are kind of, and because of some of the pressures that we're under, I think there is that aspect of that pressure cooker where we have to get along a little bit differently, and so we do. But I would really like to have a conversation about this, you know, sometimes, because it does impact people's lives. I know because of the way the communities are, like, there was a good friend of mine who I grew up with, who was Pakistani, where like I didn't get invited to most of her wedding activities because it was like the family was doing the invites, and so you forget about your Bengali friends. You know, like I went to the main thing, but like all the other stuff they kind of like forgot about us because the guest list was like heavily who they interact with in their community, and I was not part of the general like, you know, party invite kind of community. So you kind of, and yet like the white friends were there, right? And it was just kind of like, oh, like you're not the white friend where you're not Desi, but you're not like Pakistani either, so you're not in that space. Like, so there's some interesting stuff that happens with that. I think it's worth talking about, certainly, especially because we're still getting these comments, right? It's been very interesting being Bengali, because a lot of people, like I will get mistaken a lot for East African, actually, which is interesting. But it's funny how the assumption is that like I'm black rather than possibly Bengali. Like it's very interesting how some of this stuff plays out. But I do think it's important to think about like formal mechanisms that have existed in other places, because this was a genocide. Like there was intention, and you know, carving out this specific ethnic group is going to be killed because of their ethnic group. So all these elements are there, and without some kind of process to really deal with it, like it can just linger, you know, and it might just go away, it might just dissolve, but it will linger. And I think that's kind of what we've experienced growing up.
Okay, who else? Okay, over here, this gentleman.
How are you?
Hi, my name is Sayan. Thank you for the fascinating talks. Really learned a lot from them. I wanted to ask you, you know, it occurs to me that the Bengali identity, Bengali identity, Bangladeshi identity, and Muslim identity, these three things are kind of all very non-overlapping, right? You are kind of, one can be a Bengali but not a Bangladeshi, one can be a Bangladeshi but not a Bengali. There are hill tribes in Bangladesh, different tribes, non-Bengali speaking tribes, and you can be Bangladeshi but not a Muslim. All these things are possible. And in some ways, the identities in that part of the world had always been historically very fluid until the 20th century, when, like many other parts of the world, identities became reified. Listening to you talk, it seemed to me that being in the United States, in some ways, have kind of made your identities again fluid, in the sense that you're Bangladeshi in some ways, but you're Americans, and you're being in this country is making you forced to interact with a lot of people that if you had been in Bangladesh, you probably wouldn't have. So that kind of leads to an opening up of the identity. And since both of you mentioned that you go to Bangladesh really often, and with social media and everything, the diaspora and the country of origin are no longer all that different, all that separate as it used to be everywhere in the world. My question to you is, do you see any role for you as second generation Bangladeshi Americans, or Bangladeshi hyphenated with other things? Do you see any role for you in Bangladesh, in the sense of modeling for people there, how to be a global citizen in this day and age? And I think that could have a lot to contribute, not just in this society, but in a place in the world that is in many ways as you mentioned, the terrorist incident that happened while you were there, that is perhaps losing the kind of plurality that it used to have, and that is important, and that is worth recuperating and preserving. And I'm curious as to generally what is your interaction like with people in Bangladesh, and what role for you do you see in the development and future of Bangladesh?
That's a great question. I think, okay, so a couple of things. So like I said, I was just in Bangladesh just recently, came back like a month ago, and my interactions with the young people over there specifically, I think that because of social media, because of globalization, the way the world is going, we're way more interconnected than we ever used to be. And I think the fact of being a global citizen, like I mentioned before, like American culture and pop culture and all of that is being transported everywhere, and in Bangladesh as well. I think that it's becoming easier for even individuals in Bangladesh to to be that global citizen per se, and cross connect with individuals. I think Bangladeshi-Americans here can definitely be a model in the sense that obviously we are having interactions with people all over the world in America, but I think it always becomes difficult when you are in a country, even though like you said, it used to be fluid. It is not only is it very divisive right now, but a lot of people, I think, even in like people who do know about Bangladesh, will not even understand that most of Bangladesh is not. I mean, all of Bangladesh is not Muslim, right? There's still there's this before how it was very fluid and there was many different types in Bangladesh. Right now, there seems to be like a sweeper that's kind of putting everyone into a large umbrella, and even if you are not Muslim, or like a more liberal than more conservative, or more conservative, you're kind of being painted in one brush. So I think that it is getting easier for individuals to connect with people worldwide, obviously, but I think that it's still very difficult for individuals to connect on that playing field with others, because they themselves are still trying to carve out their own identity in their own country, because it's still very confusing. Am I going to be what does Bangladeshi mean for me right now? I'm not, obviously in Bangladesh, you're not a Bangladeshi hyphenated anything, you're Bangladeshi, right? Or you're Bengali or whatever, but I think that because we're all connected right now, it becomes important to kind of rally around one term. So now you're going to be Bangladeshi. Well, then what does Bangladeshi mean? And I think we're kind of all shifting towards trying to figure out what that one term means and kind of homogenize everything instead of try to, and like you said, like that is becoming more fluid, but it's also kind of becoming identical in a sort of way and kind of like becoming one instead of keeping your individual. And so right here what we're struggling with is being our Bangladeshi-American and then trying to keep everything else. But then over there it's kind of, it's for my own experience, I see it's more of like becoming it's not always going to be like a mosaic. It's more like you're trying to rally around one identity. So I think it's also because of like the place, like the economy, like Bangladesh's economy, like, you know, you want your nation to be strong, you want your nation to grow, and I think that is a lot of the part of like trying to be this one identity less than, and sometimes, I mean, I don't know if everyone is in agreement with like the way the country is going with like the religious outlook and the way, the identity that they're slowly progressing towards, but that is what's happening, and yeah.
That was a really good question. So I think, I don't know, there's definitely interesting parts of it. I think part of it is that struggle of like, where are we even here, you know, to even start thinking about abroad, like trying to figure out like what's going on here and how we can get almost, not in control of things, but to understand our place better and where we fit and all of that, and try to devote so much time to that I haven't been thinking as much about like what is my responsibility toward Bangladesh. But at the same time, I think there always is that kind of tie back. It's interesting because for our parents' generation, I think a lot of them automatically had that kind of tie of like sending money back, sending, you know, reading the Daily Star. You know, my dad was very much like writing, sending in like letters to the editor, op-eds and stuff like that to the Daily Star, largest like English language newspaper in Dhaka, and like. So there was a little bit more, and my mom even now, like she has like NTV on the TV, right, where she's just like listening to that all day. So I'll like when I go home or when I would see them, and especially with my dad, like we would talk about like, okay, what's going on. And now with my cousins, like on Facebook, I'm so glad for that because I'm like in touch with them and see their daily lives. For the most part, they're kind of in. Like I have one cousin who's like in graphic design and art, but then the other ones are like in teaching or engineering or medicine or, you know, some of these fields. So in some ways I don't really hear as much about the political. Like I'm of the family, like I'm the one who's always, even my sister is like, I don't know, just like political everything on Facebook all the time. But I think like for me, when I'm thinking about what is my role toward Bangladesh, and I would need to know more information because I don't want to fall into that trap of being an American who feels like she knows everything. And to go back and just be like, and this is how you guys should do things, right? So there's that aspect. And one way that I have kept the tie, my dad had founded, so he grew up, like I mentioned, in a small village, but he, since 5th grade, had scholarships for his schooling, so he was able to go from that small village to Buet and to come here, and was able to raise up his whole family on like his salary alone. So one thing that he did was he founded a nonprofit organization. It's in Shirajganj, where he grew up. And there's about 50 orphaned kids there who, they go to public school, but the organization that he founded funds the place that they live. They fund their clothing, their food, their textbooks, their school funds, you know, all of their uniforms, like everything that they need to go to school, they fund it. And so that organization, he developed it, or he founded it a few years back, and so I'm now, since he passed away, like, you know, the new board has been working, but it's a lot of his friends, actually, from Buet, is that they all came to the United States. They have their friends back there who, like, run the on the ground, but I'm the legal advisor to the organization, and that's been something that has been very important to me, to stay in touch and to just, like, talk to some of my dad's friends, right, about what they're doing and what their plans are. And even though that's a different kind of avenue, it's more of the social services, I want to say. It's a little bit more of that than necessarily political or narrative even. It's still one way for me to kind of give back and to make sure that I'm staying in touch with what's going on and keeping that connection. And, you know, my dad, his vision was that it was like education would help break the cycle of poverty. And that was kind of what he believed in, and that's why he did the work. I do think that it would be, and this is another, I think it's because my mom came from a political family. Like, she has actively told me, like, don't talk to anybody about politics. Because there were certain like, there have been human rights situations, right? Where, like, on Twitter, I'll be, like, tweeting about some hashtag or something, right? And there was a situation where it was a blogger, I think, from France, somebody from France who had been in jail in Bangladesh, like, being held indefinitely, right? And so I'm like on this hashtag, and somebody reached out, and they're like, "Do you know anybody out there?" And I was like, So I went to my mom, and she's probably not gonna let me telling the story, but she was just like, "I don't want you getting involved with any of this right now, so like leave it alone." So I managed, she did have some suggestions of how to deal with it, but in some ways, because politics can be so volatile, she has kind of a hesitation with it. She doesn't like politics. She doesn't want me to get involved. And she's kind of nervous in that sense because thinking about the diaspora, especially in like the UK, it's like there are, political relatives who have become politicians in the UK who have connections back to Bangladesh. So there's an interesting tension there, I think, with like wanting to get involved, but maybe coming more at that charitable social services side rather than kind of the political arm of it. But I think it's certainly an interesting question. I'm still young, right? So who knows what happens? But we'll see. But I think it is very important. The idea of fluidity for identity, I think, is really, really crucial. And I think even growing up, I kind of understood that better. And I think right now the tensions that are forcing people to kind of pick one and stick with it is really damaging. And I used to love that fluidity of like explaining like what's the difference between Bangladeshi and Bengali, right? Or languages or cultures or way you can be Hindu and you can be in India, like what, And I used to love being able to talk about that and thought that was a really beautiful thing to have that. And even with my parents or my aunt, like her husband was Indian Bengali, right? And so we would talk, like my mom would joke about like the differences and like, and we would have like a lot more dialogue about these things. Whereas now I think you just have to like pick one and you're like the poster child for that. And I think that's damaging and negative for a lot of people for many reasons.
Thank you. Okay, so if you have a statement to make, you don't have to ask a question. If you want to make a statement or just give us your feelings or opinions, you can do that too. Who would like to be next? Did you raise your hand? Okay, you could be next, and then you could be. We got time for a couple more, so we'll do Tobin, then we'll do Nusrat. You want to go up there and use the mic?
Sure. Probably, well, my voice isn't all that loud. First, I want to thank you both. I got kind of a surprise here. It's I hear a talk right there that reminds me how little I actually know, and that happens a lot of times right there. It's humbling. But listening to you talk vis-a-vis your own experiences, I was reminded of a popular phrase here in the United States, and I can only really speak out of my own experience. One that's bothered me for a number of reasons, because it's both loaded and it's empty right there, is the phrase political correctness. Because what that does is wipe out, what that's usually used to do is stop conversation and assert one singular point of view as being the one that's important. And what your talk reminded me of, both of what you were saying, is to understand, and I'm only scratching the surface with this as far as my knowledge goes, but what I'll learn about a particular thing is going to come straight from somebody who's actually lived it, whether here or abroad or intergenerationally, as been passed down to you, and that is a real privilege right there, because it's difficult to learn even when you know what you're talking about right there. And I've heard you articulate some of the difficulties of Bangladeshi identity, not simply here in Hamtramck right there, but within your own community, within family and everything. And it's just it's reassuring to me when I hear that can bring a voice to that oftentimes is the distinction, the tendency, the overwhelming tendency in society is to erase those distinctions rather than discuss them. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So thank you both. This is like my heart is singing right now. So I guess I have like two tiny questions. One relates to accessibility. I know Namirah, you touched on this, but one relates to accessibility of like research. Because I know like I went through this phase in high school where I was like really into like understanding Bangladeshi identity, and I think like the extent to my like research was like Wikipedia and like blogs, which I mean I know it's not reliable, right? So like that was the extent to which I was able to like find like research, if you can call it research, on the war, for example, and lots of other things that happened. And another example is like listening to my grandmother, right? So the research was like online blogs and like the narrative experiences of my grandmother, and that was kind of the extent to which I was able to like find resources and whenever I did come across like a book by like a Bangladeshi woman, for example, like I would be so happy and like over the moon, right? So I guess my first question is about like accessibility of like research and like resources. And then my second question, I guess, relates to, because I know we talked about, like I feel like a lot of the times Bangladeshi second generation immigrants, many of them have the opportunity to be able to go back to Bangladesh and kind of like understand, I guess, their roots or whatever, right? But I think I was able to go to Bangladesh back in like when I was 9 years old, right? So I haven't had like the opportunity to go back, right? So I guess my second question is how, as a person who I guess doesn't have the opportunity to like reconnect, I guess, physically with that environment, with that space, how do you kind of like understand your identity kind of like remotely, I guess you could say. So those are my two questions.
So I was actually just looking up because there's a Facebook page that I've been following, and I think it's somebody, I can't remember now if I actually was able to connect with the person who like runs the page, but I think there's a team of people who do it. But it's called the Bangladeshi Historical Memory Project on Facebook. There's like 7,000 followers, but they will post like articles and things like that, right? And I think it touches on both of the questions, because one is like how do you connect without having the physical means or the time or the financial resources to go back. The internet would be my first kind of solution, and I think that can be partly a solution for both things. One, it's like I think it would be great to have a much more connected second generation, to multi-generational really, but especially for second generation like Bangladeshi-Americans, where our parents are from Bangladesh but we were born here. For us to be able to connect online more and to have these discussions more, like I realized I had sent out like a status about like what are some books on the Liberation War, and so I was able to kind of crowdsource almost like a list, and there's like 7 books on there right now that people recommended, and so that was like one way to start the discussion, because it's like, oh, like let's all come together and talk about this. So I think that's one solution in some ways, where it at least gets us a little bit further, is to be able to use crowdsourcing, use the internet, to be able to talk a little bit more with each other and to connect with each other, and then to see like what initiatives are there and to support those initiatives. I think it goes back to also the first question about the dominant narrative question, right? Where it's like we need to invest in our own community and we need to invest in our own education, and make sure that we are funding it, and then also putting in our time and our volunteer efforts and all of that to making sure that we're like promoting the initiatives that are happening within this space, even if they're small. I've been meaning to, and maybe we can plan this out, but I've been meaning to go to New York to just meet with some of the Bangladeshi women who are activists in the streets there, because I feel like they have a much more, not necessarily like a stronger connection, but it's more vibrant with culture there, and to be able to talk about some of these issues and protest signs in Bangla, and like looking at some of the strategies for activism too and organizing, where some of the women that I'm like so happy to be friends with on Facebook, like they'll be talking about like, and the women during the Liberation War, like this is what they did, and I was like, wait, what? Like I don't know any of this information, and I feel like right now a lot of it's not necessarily in books and it's not on websites, but it's like through these personal anecdotes and the narratives that we are able to share with each other. But I think we need to be much more intentional about seeking out other people who have this information, and then possibly writing it down, right? I mean, we have such a strong like literary tradition, and I feel like that is something that I really would like to bring back, the artistic, poetic song, like all of this cultural stuff that we have within, as Bengalis, as all of that, like to be able to make sure that we're writing more and that we're producing more. I mean, I think that's one of the tragedies of the war, is that there was a targeting of, intellectuals, public intellectuals, authors, all of that to kill them off, so that there isn't that much of that strong voice anymore. So I think that's part of it. I think it would be great to just have, maybe I'll have a little field trip to New York or something, but to at least connect using the internet. I mean, Muslim Arc, like my organization, we literally were born out of the internet. We connected over Twitter, and it's now 3 years later, and we're like looking to physically establish, an office on the ground, but we were born out of Twitter. So a lot can happen off of the internet connections that we have with each other.
Okay, so I'm gonna start by saying I love Bollywood. She loves Bollywood, right? She said that. I would say like in America, in London, and wherever population, in Bangladesh, Bengalis love Bollywood. We grow up watching Bollywood. We understand Hindi now. Like a lot of us understand Hindi. We don't need subtitles for our movies. Like we get it. Like she said, like if someone came up speaking Urdu to me, now I get it. Whether I want to acknowledge it or not, like I'll understand. And okay, so that's great. Yes, Bollywood is a manufactured culture of India that is very biased and whatnot, but it's there. It's something that Indians are very proud of, depending on who you ask. But for the most part, they're very proud of it, and it's something that they can be like, look, this is my culture. Like this is. But yeah, like Bangladeshis, we don't have that. We have Bangladeshi movie industry. We have Bangladeshi songs, Bangladeshi music, like everything. Like she said, like our culture is so rich, so cool, so interesting. But like we don't know. We don't know about it, and the tragedy is that there's so few. I think it all comes back to, again, like representation. Like it doesn't help you to tell you that like, oh, go and become that person, but like it will help the next person if we go and become that person who contributes. And I will say, like, so, like, my dad, it's funny that you brought up, like, a book thing. Like, I remember, like, years ago, like, he also started, like, amongst his Facebook friends, he, like, started a private group, and he, like, invited all his friends, and he's like, we need, for the next generation, we need books. He's like, I need books about the Liberation War. Everyone, like, contribute, and he did get a good list going. But, again, it comes back to, I can't remember who we were talking about it, but about, like, the biasness of what happened. Some books are, like, who is to say what is accurate? Like, every single book that you may read about the Bangladeshi Independence War is probably different facts and different, statistics and different things like that. So, again, like, since it is recent history, I think it'll still take quite a bit of time. I mean, people were, even though it was faulty and things like that, people were tried for these crimes just the other day, like yesterday, So, I mean, it's going to take some more time for those facts to, be accepted and more, like, homogeneity and, like, in the books and things that we get. But I will say, and this is something that I really try to do, since I was little, is that the fact that, like you were talking about, like the white flight, like we leave, like also we lived in Hamtramck when we first moved, and then we moved to Rochester Hills. So we go there, we go to different areas, or even in like Hamtramck, you can like live in your own bubble, right? You have Bangladesh all around you, but you can still like not, you don't necessarily have to be connected with the entire community. I mean, you're one person, how are you gonna, connect with everyone? But what is, I think, most important is literally just understanding, because I think a lot that comes with like moving to the suburbs is there's a certain like, okay, I am like going to a better place, so I don't really need these people anymore, or like these are like again coming back to like the fob and boater mentality. Like these are people who are just like fresh off the boat. Like what are they going to help me with anything? Like that, like I don't need them. Like they're not related to me. They're not my parents' friends. Like what are they gonna? But like including them, but also anyone. I think it's important for us to like any Bangladesh you find like. Just, I know, like, it's weird and people don't do this, but, like, I'm weird and I do weird things, but, like, go up to people and just ask them their story, because every single one has a story. Like, it's for everyone in the world, like, everyone has a story, but if you really want to understand your culture and understand, like, where you come from, and you can't go to Bangladesh, even, I would say, even going to Bangladesh, I don't understand my culture as much as I can, because I think what you learn more, like, like, okay, I'm reading a book about the war and I hear like all these people died, but then I go to like one of my mom's relatives and they say the war was nothing, we felt nothing, like I don't even, and then the other person's like, oh, we were so involved, and another person I asked and they're like, you know, like we were so unsure, we didn't know whether we should follow them or should we, because like we were just hearing things, and like we had one family member go and fight, but we were like, you know, everyone has it. Just like if war broke out in Rochester Hills right now and we were in Hamtramck, how would we know like what is exactly happening in Rochester Hills? Like we wouldn't know, you know, like everything has so many different perspectives. And so I would just say, as many people as you know, like it's great that you heard from your dadi or nani, I can't remember, but it's great, like I did the same thing with my grandma, but like it's important, like wherever you go, like, and the thing is, people love talking about themselves, so they will tell you as much as you want, and so I think it's a very informal tool, but like Namirah said, like if you then write it down, you know, like that's a tool for the next generation, and that's how it can go.
I can't remember, I have to look it up, but there was another resource online too that's like kind of the Humans of New York kind of resource, except they're doing it with Bangladeshis too. And I don't know if the person is in Bangladesh doing it, but they have the picture and they'll have like a story. So I'll have to look it up and see what the page is called, but that is another resource too.
What you're talking about, it's like the G?
Yeah, it's like 2 letters and then G something, so I have to look it up. But and then that reminded me too, Farha, what you mentioned, because when I was in DC, I was speaking at this awards ceremony, and I mentioned just kind of briefly, it was within 5 minutes, but I had talked about my story about growing up and kind of identity. And so afterward from the audience, like so many people came up just by me mentioning it, of like Bangladesh, Pakistan, all these like tensions and everything. And there were some Pakistanis who came up and they were like, and I speak Bangla because I lived in Dhaka, you know, and then after the war I had to leave. And, you know, and so it was just fascinating because there were multiple stories and multiple narratives. And I think making things more complex and having the nuance is really important. So even just mentioning the fact that not just falling back on like, and I'm a Muslim American, you know, and like, because it can be a box, you know, and I think by any time I've mentioned like, and I'm Bengali and I'm Bangladeshi and, you know, these are some of the things I face, like every single time people have come up from the audience and have told me their personal stories about their identity and about their parents or their grandparents. So that's something too, it's just like bring your whole self to wherever you are.
I just want to say one more thing. No, this is just a recommendation if you haven't read it. It's a fiction, but it's a historical fiction. Golden Age by Namirah Islam. It's a really good one. Like I really enjoyed reading it, and it's a fiction, but it's very historical, and you'll learn a lot about the war, and it's like a great like intro to everything.
Okay. All right. Let's give a nice round of applause to our 2 featured speakers. Thank you, Namirah and Farha. And we're going to finish here. We're right on schedule. And you said exactly what I was going to say at the end here. We each have stories. Everyone out here, the questions and the statements you made, the few folks who got to speak, thank you very much. It just lets us know that everyone in this room has stories. And we learned 2 stories from 2 very unique people who I didn't know anything about a lot of that stuff. So I really appreciate you for sharing your personal and your political and your awareness of what's going on with identity especially. We all have our own identity and issues of life with our family, and personal and political and social, and we certainly got a chance to learn from the 2 of you. Thank you so much. And the rest of you, if you would like to support the work that we do with OneHamtramck, this is the idea, is to try to learn about each other so that we can bring the communities together. We want to try to see more cross-cultural gatherings, and this is a very nice mix here today. We appreciate you for being here today on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. Is it beautiful out there? I think it is. It wasn't. Maybe it isn't. Maybe, I'm glad. So that's why you're here. Huh? Actually, there was a rally going on today, a global climate rally, and all sorts of things happening, and we appreciate you choosing this event to be at. But we do this every month, so when we do a thing on Yemen, you know, it's terrible what's going on in Yemen right now. If you're not Yemeni, that doesn't mean you don't have to come to the event. We have to help and support each other. So come to our events, suggest ideas on events to have, discussions you think we need to have so that we can bring people together. And support our project that's coming up here in Hamtramck, the Bangladesh Mural Project and Concert Project, which will be coming soon. There's some information on the wall there about that. And make sure you signed in so that we can keep in touch with you and inform you about our mural next month. We hope to see each one of you at our monthly forum next month. So we hope to see each one of you at next month, and then tell your friends and come in and pretty soon we'll have everybody together here and we'll learn about each other like we just learned about the Bangladeshi identity. Thank you so much again for being here.